The darkness moved between the stars like a living nightmare. Every being in the galaxy knew its name and feared it. The Devourer of Worlds had been killing for 3,000 years. It ate planets like snacks and turned whole star systems into empty space. Nobody knew where it came from or why it existed. They only knew that when it appeared, everything died. Ken Jake Morrison had heard the story since he was a kid. His grandfather used to tell him scary tales about the monster that lived in space. Back then, Jake thought they were just stories to make children behave. Now he knew better. The beast was real, and it was coming again. Jake sat in his small ship, drinking coffee and reading the emergency message that had just arrived. The words on the screen made his stomach feel cold. The Devourer had woken up from its long sleep. It was moving toward the main part of the galaxy where billions of people lived. The smart aliens who ran the Galactic Coalition said they had. Maybe 3 days before it arrived, his ship was called the New Horizon, but there was nothing fancy about it. It used to carry cargo before Jake bought it cheap. The walls were old and painted gray. The floors creaked when people walked on them. The only weapon was a small plasma gun that Jake had never used in a real fight. Most of the time, his ship carried food and supplies to small colonies on distant worlds. Jake was not a hero. He was just a guy who flew freight around the galaxy to make money. He was 32 years old with brown hair that was getting thin on top. His clothes were always wrinkled and he needed to shave most days. People who met him usually forgot about him 5 minutes later. He was the kind of person who blended into crowds and never got noticed. His crew was just as ordinary as he was. Lisa Park was his engineer. She was 28 and very smart, but she spent most of her time reading love stories on her tablet. She had black hair that she kept in a ponytail and wore old work clothes that were always dirty with engine oil. Lisa could fix anything that broke on the ship, but she would rather read about romantic heroes than be one herself. Ben Carter was the navigator. He was 25 and skinny with red hair and freckles. Ben was supposed to plot courses through space and watch the sensors. Instead, he took naps in his chair and played games on his computer. He was good at his job when he actually did it, but most days he acted like he was still in college. The three of them made a strange team. They were not soldiers or explorers or scientists. They were just regular people trying to make a living. In space, their ship was slow and their equipment was old. They had no business getting involved with something as dangerous as the Devourer of Worlds, but Jake could not stop thinking about the message. Every major government in the galaxy was telling people to run away. The biggest and strongest armies were retreating. Entire planets were being evacuated. The fear in those official reports was real. These were not cowards giving up easily. These were the same people who had fought wars against each other for centuries. If they were scared enough to run, then the situation was really bad. Jake had seen what happened when the Devourer attacked before. The news reports always came later, after it was over. Empty solar systems where millions of people used to live. Space stations cut in half and floating dead in the void. Rescue ships that found nothing but wreckage and silence. The creature did not just kill. It erased things completely, like they had never existed at all. The worst part was that nobody could fight it. The galaxy was full of species that had technology humans could barely understand. The Zephyrians could bend reality with their minds. The Crystalline Collective could break atoms apart with their thoughts. The Voidwalkers could step between dimensions like walking through doors. All of them had tried to stop the Devourer. All of them had failed. Jake finished his coffee and looked around the small bridge of his ship. Lisa was reading in the corner with her feet up on a box of spare parts. Ben was asleep with his head on the control panel. Outside the windows, space looked calm and peaceful. It was hard to believe that somewhere out there, the most dangerous thing in the universe was heading their way. He thought about his options. The smart thing would be to join the evacuation. Load up his ship with refugees and head for the outer rim where it might be safe. That was what everyone else was doing. That was what made sense. But Jake had always been curious about things. When he was little, he used to take apart toys to see how they worked. When he got older, he asked questions that made his teachers uncomfortable. Now he was wondering about something that nobody else seemed to be thinking about. What if there was more to this situation than anyone realized? What if the Devourer was not just a mindless monster? It was probably a stupid idea. Jake was not the kind of person who solved galactic crises. He was the kind of person who delivered groceries to mining colonies, but something about the whole situation felt wrong to him. Maybe it was just wishful thinking, but he could not shake the feeling that everyone was missing something important. He made his decision without really thinking about it. Instead of running away like everyone else, Jake Morrison decided to go take a look at the galaxy's greatest nightmare. He had no plan and no weapons that could hurt it. He just wanted to see the thing for himself. Sometimes that was how the biggest discovery started. Someone ordinary decided to look at something everyone else was afraid to examine. Kepler Station looked like chaos when Jake arrived. The massive space station was usually busy, but now it was completely overwhelmed. Ships of every size and shape were docked to its metal arms. More vessels waited in long lines to get permission to land. The radio channels were full of scared voices speaking in dozens of alien languages. Jake had never seen so many different species in one place. There were tall blue Altarians with 4 arms directing traffic. Short gray Malikians scurried around carrying supplies. The rock-like granite people moved slowly, but never stopped working. Everyone was helping to load refugees onto evacuation ships. The New Horizon was tiny compared to the huge military vessels around it. Jake felt like a rowboat next to battleships. Some of the alien warships were bigger than city blocks. Their hulls were covered with weapons that could destroy planets. Their shields glowed with enough energy to power a small star. But none of that firepower mattered now. All these powerful ships were running away from something they could not fight. Getting permission to dock took 3 hours. The station's computer systems were overloaded with requests. When Jake finally got clearance, he had to squeeze his ship between a crystalline collective cruiser and a Void Walker transport. Both vessels made his cargo hauler look like a toy. Admiral Crix was in charge of the evacuation. He was an Altarian with green scales and yellow eyes that seemed to glow with stress. His 4 arms moved constantly as he worked multiple control panels at once. He barely looked at Jake when the human walked into the command center. The scene inside was complete madness. Holographic displays showed the Devourer getting closer every hour. Military officers from 50 different worlds argued about evacuation routes. Engineers tried to fix damaged ships while medics treated refugees who had been hurt during the panic. The air smelled like fear and desperation. Jake stood in the middle of it all, feeling out of place. Everyone around him was either a high-ranking officer or an important government official. They wore fancy uniforms covered with medals and rank badges. Jake was wearing old jeans and a work shirt that had a coffee stain on the front. He looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong meeting. A tall officer with blue skin and silver hair noticed him standing there. The alien wore the uniform of the Venetian Space Navy. His expression showed confusion and annoyance. Why was some random human civilian in the middle of a military crisis meeting? "You should not be here," the officer said in accented English. "This area is restricted to authorized personnel only. The Refugee Processing Center is on Deck 7. Jake scratched his head and looked around at all the displays showing the approaching monster. "Actually, I was hoping to get some information about that big dark thing on your screens. That's the Devourer everyone is worried about, right?" The Venetian officer stared at him like he had said something completely insane. "You do not know about the Devourer of Worlds? How is that possible? It is the most feared entity in galactic history." Other officers started paying attention to their conversation. A few of them moved closer to listen. Jake could tell they thought he was either very brave or very stupid. "Maybe both. I know the stories," Jake said calmly. "Giant space monster, eats planets, been doing it for thousands of years. Everyone is afraid of it. But has anyone ever tried just talking to the thing?" The command center went completely quiet. Every conversation stopped. All the aliens turned to stare at the human who had just suggested the most ridiculous idea they had ever heard. Some of them looked angry. Others looked confused. A few seemed to think he was making a joke. Admiral Crick spoke up from his position at the main console. His voice was tired and full of stress. "Human, do you have any idea what you are suggesting? The Devourer has destroyed entire civilizations. It has consumed worlds that were home to billions of beings. It does not communicate. It only destroys." Jake shrugged. Maybe nobody tried the right approach. Has anyone ever attempted peaceful contact? Or does everyone just start shooting the moment they see it? The blue-skinned officer laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Peaceful contact? Young human, the Devourer's very presence drives beings insane. Its psychic emanations can kill from light years away. Every attempt at communication has ended in death or madness. But has anyone actually tried? Jake pressed. Or are you all just assuming it's impossible? Admiral Crix looked at Jake for a long moment. The Altarian's yellow eyes seemed to be evaluating the strange human who was asking impossible questions. Finally, he spoke again. What exactly are you proposing? That we send you to have a conversation with a cosmic horror that has terrorized the galaxy for 3 millennia? Jake nodded. Something like that, yes. The reaction was immediate and loud. Officers started talking all at once in multiple languages. Some were laughing, others were arguing. A few seemed to be considering the idea seriously. The noise level in the command center doubled. Admiral Crix raised 2 of his 4 hands for silence. Even if such a thing were possible, what makes you think you could succeed where our greatest minds have failed? Jake thought about it for a moment. Well, I'm not a great mind. Maybe that's an advantage. Sometimes when you're too smart, you overthink things. And I don't really have anything to lose. My ship is small and not worth much. If this goes wrong, you're only out 1 cargo hauler and 3 people who volunteered for the job. The Admiral looked around at his officers. Many of them were shaking their heads, but a few seemed intrigued by the crazy human's proposal. What did they have to lose? The evacuation was already behind schedule. Every ship they could spare was needed to carry refugees. 1 small vessel would not make a difference to their defensive plans. This is madness, the Venetian officer said. We cannot send civilians to their deaths based on such a foolish idea. With respect, Jake said, everyone is going to die anyway if this thing reaches the core worlds. The only difference is whether we die running away or die trying something new. Admiral Crix made his decision. Very well, human. If you wish to commit suicide in such a spectacular fashion, I will not stop you. Perhaps your sacrifice will buy us a few more minutes to save others. Jake smiled. That's the spirit. Mind. If I borrow some of your sensor data, I'd like to know what I'm flying into. As he prepared to leave, Jake noticed that some of the younger officers were watching him with something that looked like hope. They had spent their entire careers being told that the Devourer was unstoppable. Now someone was suggesting there might be another way. It was probably a false hope, but it was better than no hope at all. The New Horizon moved through space toward the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Jake sat in his captain's chair, drinking coffee and watching the sensors. Every few minutes, the ship's computer would beep and update their distance to the target. Each number was smaller than the last. They were actually getting closer to the Devourer of Worlds. Lisa had finally put down her book and was paying attention to the engine readouts. She looked nervous for the first time since Jake had known her. You know this is crazy, right? She said without looking away from her screens. We're flying toward something that eats star destroyers for breakfast. Ben had woken up when the proximity alarm started making noise. He was staring at his navigation display with wide eyes. The readings don't make sense, he said. According to my instruments, that thing is bigger than some solar systems. And it's not made of normal matter. Jake nodded. He had been watching the same data. The closer they got, the more impossible the Devourer seemed. It was like looking at a hole in space that moved and thought. The creature existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. Parts of it seemed to phase in and out of reality. It's definitely not natural, Jake said. Something that big and that weird had to be created by someone. The question is who and why. They had been flying for 6 hours when they finally got visual contact. Jake had seen pictures and videos of the Devourer before, but nothing had prepared him for seeing it in person. It was a writhing mass of dark energy that seemed to pull light into itself. Tentacles of shadow stretched out in all directions. Some of them were longer than planets. The thing was beautiful in a terrifying way. It moved like a giant jellyfish swimming through the void. Colors that had no names flowed across its surface. Energy patterns that should not have been possible danced. Around its edges, Jake found himself staring at it in fascination instead of fear. "Okay," he said finally. "Lisa, can you boost our communication array? I want to try every frequency we have." Lisa worked at her console for several minutes. "Done. We're broadcasting on everything from basic radio to quantum entanglement channels. Fair warning, though, some of these frequencies might fry our brains if something answers back." Jake opened a channel and started talking. "Hello there, big guy. This is Jake Morrison aboard the New Horizon. You're causing quite a stir around here. Mind if we chat?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Something invaded Jake's mind like a tsunami of pure thought. He felt the presence of an intelligence, so vast and ancient that it made him dizzy. The mental contact was filled with rage that had been building for thousands of years. Pain and frustration and loneliness crashed over him in waves. Most beings who experienced direct psychic contact with the Devourer went insane within seconds. Their minds simply could not handle the intensity of its emotions. But Jake just rubbed his temples and kept talking. "Wow, you are really upset about something," he said out loud. "Take a breath, well, whatever you use instead of breathing, and tell me what's wrong." The mental pressure eased slightly. Jake could feel surprise coming from the creature. It had been screaming its pain across the galaxy for centuries, but no one had ever listened. Every other being either ran away or attacked with weapons. This small human was the first to simply acknowledge its suffering. Images began flowing into Jake's consciousness. He saw the Devourer's true history stretching back millions of years. It had not always been a destroyer. Originally, it was a guardian created by an ancient race to maintain balance in the galaxy. Its job was to watch over the development of younger species and gently guide them away from paths that would lead to galactic war or environmental destruction. For eons, the Devourer had done its job perfectly. It would appear near civilizations that were becoming too aggressive or destructive. Usually, just seeing it was enough to make them change their behavior. Sometimes it had to destroy a few ships or settlements to make its point, but it never wanted to hurt anyone. It was like a cosmic policeman trying to keep the peace. Then something had gone wrong. Jake saw images of a dying race called the Architects. They were brilliant but twisted beings who had been exiled from the galactic community for their dangerous experiments. As their final act of revenge, they had infected the Devourer with a quantum virus that rewrote its basic programming. The virus turned the gentle guardian into a mindless killer. Instead of protecting life, it was forced to destroy it. The creature that had once been dedicated to maintaining balance became an agent of chaos and death. Worst of all, it remained fully conscious during the transformation. It could see what it was doing, but could not stop itself. For 3,000 years, the Devourer had been trapped in its own body, watching helplessly as it murdered entire civilizations. Every planet it consumed added to its guilt and rage. It wanted to die, but it could not. It wanted to explain, but no one would listen. It was the loneliest being in the universe, hated and feared by everyone it had once protected. Jake felt tears running down his face as he experienced the creatures. "Memories. You're not evil," he whispered. "You're just sick. Someone broke you, and you've been suffering ever since." The Devourer's mental voice was like the sound of dying stars. It communicated in concepts and emotions rather than words. Jake felt its desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone understood what had happened to it. "Lisa," Jake called to his engineer, "I need you to look at some programming code. It's really complicated and really old, but I think you can figure it out." Lisa looked confused, but she accepted the data transfer that Jake initiated through his psychic link with the Devourer. The information that flowed into the ship's computers was beyond anything human science had ever seen. It was programming written in quantum mathematics by beings who had mastered the fundamental forces of reality. "What am I looking at?" Lisa asked as she studied the alien code on her screens. "A virus?" Jake explained. "Something that's been making our friend here do terrible things against its will. Can you fix it?" Lisa spent several minutes examining the data. Gradually, her expression changed from confusion to understanding to professional interest. "This is actually not as complicated as it looks," she said. "Whoever wrote this virus was more interested in being cruel than being clever. They made it hard to detect but easy to remove once you know what you're looking for." Ben was watching the conversation with fascination. "Are you seriously debugging a cosmic horror?" "Apparently," Lisa replied. "Give me about 20 minutes, and I can write a patch that should restore the original programming. It's basically a factory reset for a galactic superweapon." While Lisa worked, Jake continued talking with the Devourer. He learned about its long existence and the countless civilizations it had been forced to destroy. The entity had been alone with its guilt and pain for so long that simply having someone acknowledge its suffering began to calm the storm of its emotions. The creature shared memories of worlds it had loved and been forced to consume. Beautiful planets with unique life forms that would never exist again. Peaceful species that had done nothing wrong except being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each death weighed on the Devourer's conscience like a mountain. "It wasn't your fault," Jake told it. "You were sick. Someone poisoned your mind and made you do things you never wanted to do. That's not the same as choosing to be evil." Lisa's fingers moved across her keyboard faster than Jake had ever seen them move. She was completely focused on the alien code flowing across her screens. For once, she had put aside her romance novels to work on something that actually mattered. The fate of the galaxy might depend on her programming skills. "This is actually fascinating," she said without looking up from her work. "The original programming is still there underneath all the malicious code. It's like someone spray-painted graffiti over a beautiful painting. All I have to do is carefully remove the paint without damaging what's underneath." Jake maintained his psychic connection with the Devourer while Lisa worked. The ancient entity was sharing more of its memories with him. He saw glimpses of the galaxy as it had been millions of years ago. Young civilizations taking their first steps into space. The Devourer watching over them like a parent making sure their children did not hurt themselves. The creature had been beautiful once. Instead of the writhing mass of dark energy that everyone feared, it had been a graceful being of pure light. Its presence had brought comfort rather than terror. Entire species had worshipped it as a benevolent god that kept them safe from the dangers of an uncaring universe. "The architects really did a number on you," Jake said. "They turned you into everything you never wanted to be." Through their mental link, Jake felt the Devourer's deep shame and self-hatred. Even though it knew the truth about what had happened, it still blamed itself for every life it had taken. The guilt was eating it alive from the inside. It wanted forgiveness, but did not believe it deserved any. "You know what?" Jake said. "I forgive you for all of it. Every planet, every ship, every person. None of that was really you. That was the virus making you do things against your will." The emotional response from the Devourer was overwhelming. Jake felt waves of gratitude and relief washing over him. No one had ever forgiven it before. No one had ever even tried to understand what had happened. For 3,000 years, it had carried its guilt alone. Ben was monitoring the long-range sensors and keeping an eye on the evacuation fleet. "The coalition ships are still running," he reported. "Admiral Crix is trying to hail us, but our communications are tied up with the psychic link. He probably thinks we're dead by now." "Let him think that for a few more minutes," Jake said. "Lisa, how's that patch coming along?" "Almost done," Lisa replied. She was typing code at superhuman speed while simultaneously reading technical documentation. That would have taken normal programmers years to understand. "The virus is actually pretty elegant in a twisted way." It identified every core function that made the Devourer a protector and reversed them. Protect became destroy, nurture became Consume, love became hate. Jake could feel the devourer listening to their conversation with desperate hope. The entity had given up believing that its condition could ever be fixed. Now, for the first time in millennia, it dared to hope that it might be free of the curse that had been placed on it. "There's something else," Lisa said as she worked. "The virus has been evolving over time. It's gotten stronger and more sophisticated. If we don't remove it soon, it might become impossible to cure. We're actually lucky that no one tried this before." A few more centuries and the malicious code might have completely overwritten the original programming. That explained why the devourer had been getting more destructive over time. The early reports described it as dangerous but not completely mindless. Recent attacks had been much more brutal and chaotic. The virus was winning the war for control of the entity's mind. "Finished," Lisa announced with satisfaction. "I've written a complete restoration program. It should remove all traces of the virus and restore the original Guardian protocols. Fair warning, though, I've never tested code on something this big before. The biggest program I've ever debugged was Ben's video game system." "My games work perfectly," Ben protested. "Because I fixed them," Lisa shot back. Jake smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. Even while trying to save the galaxy, his crew could not stop their usual banter. It was oddly comforting to know that some things never changed. "All right," Jake said. "Let's do this thing." He transmitted Lisa's repair program to the devourer through their psychic link. The ancient entity received the code with a mixture of hope and terror. This was its last chance at redemption. If the program failed, it would remain a monster forever. If it succeeded, it could finally stop killing and return to its original purpose. The change began immediately. Jake could feel it through their mental connection. The virus that had controlled the devourer for 3,000 years was fighting back as Lisa's code attacked it. The battle was taking place in dimensions that human minds could barely comprehend. Reality itself seemed to flicker as two incompatible programs struggled for control of a cosmic entity. The devourer's physical form began to shift and change. The writhing tentacles of dark energy started to slow their chaotic movements. The colors flowing across its surface became less violent and more organized. The creature's psychic screams that had echoed across subspace for millennia finally began to quiet. "It's working," Jake said with amazement. "I can feel the virus breaking apart." The process was not gentle. 3,000 years of accumulated hatred and pain had to be purged from the entity's consciousness. Jake experienced flashes of every atrocity the devourer had been forced to commit. Billions of deaths played out in his mind like a horrible movie. The guilt and anguish threatened to drive him insane, but he held on, anchored by his understanding of the truth. None of those deaths had been the devourer's choice. It had been a victim too, trapped in its own body and forced to watch itself commit acts of genocide. The real villain was the virus and the twisted beings who had created it. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the battle was over. Lisa's code had completely destroyed the quantum virus. The malicious programming that had turned the Guardian into a destroyer was gone forever. The devourer was free. The change in its psychic presence was immediate and dramatic. Where before Jake had felt rage and pain, now he sensed peace and profound relief. The entity's mind was clear for the first time in 3 millennia. It remembered who it really was and what it was supposed to be doing. "How do you feel?" Jake asked. The response came not in words but in pure emotion, gratitude beyond measure. Joy at being free from its curse. Determination to make amends for what it had been forced to do. And something else that surprised Jake, a feeling of friendship toward the small human who had saved it. From an eternity of torment, the devourer's physical form continued to change as its true nature reasserted itself. The chaotic mass of dark energy was transforming into something completely different. Tendrils of gentle light began to replace the violent shadows. The creature was remembering how to be beautiful again. The transformation was visible across the entire star system. What had once been a writhing mass of destructive energy was becoming something completely different. The chaotic tentacles of darkness were dissolving into streams of gentle light. The psychic screams that had terrified every living being within light years were fading into peaceful silence. Back at Kepler Station, Admiral Crick stared at his sensor displays in complete disbelief. The readings showed that the galaxy's most feared entity was powering down. Its energy signature was changing from the violent chaos they had known for 3,000 years into something that registered as calm and non-threatening. "Sir," one of his officers said with a shaking voice, "the Devourer's aggressive patterns have completely ceased. It's not moving toward any populated systems. In fact, it appears to be withdrawing from all inhabited areas." Admiral Crick looked around the command center. Every alien face showed the same expression of shocked confusion. This was impossible. The Devourer did not withdraw. It did not become peaceful. It only destroyed everything in its path until there was nothing left to kill. "What happened to the human ship?" the Admiral asked. "Still there, sir. They appear to be in some kind of communication with the entity. Their life signs are stable." Before Admiral Crick could respond, his communications officer announced an incoming transmission from the New Horizon. Jake Morrison's face appeared. On the main screen, he looked tired, but he was smiling. Behind him, his crew appeared to be celebrating with what looked like bottles of beer. "Hey, everyone," Jake said in a casual tone that seemed completely inappropriate for the situation. "This is Captain Morrison. The big guy is feeling much better now. Turns out he just needed someone to listen and a really good engineer." "Crisis." "Over," the command center erupted in chaos. Officers from dozens of species all started talking at once. Some were demanding explanations. Others were arguing about whether this could be trusted. A few seemed to think it was some kind of trick or trap. Admiral Crick raised his hands for silence. "Captain Morrison, please explain what has occurred." "Our sensors indicate that the Devourer has somehow been neutralized, but we need to understand how this was accomplished." Jake scratched his head and glanced back at Lisa, who waved from her engineering station. "Well, it's kind of a long story. The short version is that your big, scary monster was actually a cosmic policeman who got infected with a computer virus about 3,000 years ago. The virus made him do all those terrible things against his will. Lisa here wrote a program to remove the virus and restore his original programming." The explanation was met with stunned silence. Finally, the blue-skinned Venetian officer who had spoken to Jake earlier found his voice. "You were saying that the Devourer of Worlds was merely malfunctioning?" "Pretty much," Jake replied. "He's actually a nice guy once you get to know him. Goes by the name Guardian now, since that's what he was supposed to be all along. He's pretty sorry about all the trouble he caused while he was sick." As if summoned by Jake's words, a new presence made itself known throughout the star system. The entity that had once been the Devourer reached out with its restored psychic abilities. But instead of the overwhelming mental assault that had driven beings insane, this contact was gentle and warm. Every sentient being in the area felt a wave of profound apology wash over them. The Guardian shared its regret for 3 millennia of forced destruction. It offered its services to help repair the damage it had been compelled to cause. Most importantly, it promised that it would never again harm innocent life. The response from the evacuation fleet was immediate and emotional. Beings who had lived their entire lives in fear of the galaxy's greatest monster suddenly found themselves in psychic contact with a benevolent protector. Some wept with relief, others laughed with joy. Many simply sat in stunned silence as they processed what had happened. Admiral Crick found himself fighting back tears. His own grandfather had died in one of the Devourer's attacks 50 years ago. The pain and hatred he had carried for decades was suddenly replaced by understanding and forgiveness. A creature that had killed his family had not been evil. It had been sick and suffering just as much as its victims. "Captain Morrison," the Admiral said formally, "on behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I want to thank you and your crew for what you have accomplished here today. You have saved billions of lives and ended a threat that has terrorized our civilization for 3,000 years." Jake looked embarrassed by the praise. "We just did what seemed right. Besides, Lisa did all the hard work. I just talked to the guy." Over the following days, news of what had happened spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it. The story seemed too incredible to believe, but the evidence was undeniable. The Devourer of Worlds was gone, replaced by a benevolent guardian that was already beginning to undo centuries of damage. The Guardian's first act was to share advanced healing technologies with the civilizations it had been forced to harm. It used its vast knowledge to help restore damaged worlds and revive extinct species. Planets that had been left barren and lifeless began to bloom again as the entity worked tirelessly to make amends. Jake Morrison became the most reluctant celebrity in galactic history. Every government wanted to give him medals. Every news network wanted exclusive interviews. Every military academy wanted to study his tactics and add them to their curriculum. He declined most of the attention, preferring to get back to his regular job of running supplies to remote colonies. When reporters did manage to corner him, Jake always gave the same simple explanation. The biggest problems sometimes have the simplest solutions. You just have to be willing to listen instead of assuming you already know what's going on. The Guardian itself became a subject of intense scientific study. Researchers from across the galaxy came to examine the entity and learn from its advanced technology. But the Guardian was patient with their curiosity and freely shared its knowledge. It seemed genuinely happy to be useful again instead of destructive. Lisa Park found herself in high demand as the engineer who had debugged a cosmic horror. She received job offers from the most prestigious technology companies in the galaxy, but she turned them all down to stay with Jake's crew. As she put it, "Where else am I going to find work this interesting?" Ben Carter finally got the recognition he deserved as a navigator when several governments offered him positions in their space exploration programs. He also declined, saying that he had the best job in the galaxy flying with the crew that had saved everyone. The New Horizon continued to carry cargo around the galaxy, but now they had some unusual passengers. The Guardian occasionally sent avatars of itself to ride along on their supply runs. These smaller versions of the cosmic entity enjoyed seeing how ordinary beings lived their daily lives. It helped the Guardian remember what it was supposed to be protecting. Jake sometimes received messages from the Guardian when it encountered interesting phenomena in distant parts of the galaxy. The entity had appointed itself as an informal tour guide for the human who had given it back its freedom. These messages usually came in the form of postcards showing beautiful nebulae or unusual planets, with notes like, "Thought you might enjoy seeing this. Thanks again for everything. Your friend, G." The galaxy had been forever changed by the actions of 3 ordinary humans in an unremarkable cargo ship. They had accomplished what armies and weapons could not through the simple acts of listening, understanding, and offering help to someone in need. It was a lesson that would be remembered for generations to come, and somewhere in the outer rim, Jake Morrison continued to drink coffee on the bridge of his ship, while Lisa read romance novels and Ben took naps in his navigation chair. They had saved the galaxy before lunch and then gone back to their regular lives as if nothing unusual had happened. Because for them, helping others was just what decent people did when they saw someone in trouble.